Hi, I'm Jeff Pierce. I didn't think that I would be making a new video so quickly, but I can't let this go unanswered because it is so contemptible, it's staggering. First, I shouldn't have to say this, but I know it will be necessary. I ordinarily have the greatest respect for the Holocaust Memorial Museum. When I visited it years ago, I tried to convince the managers there to open a small exhibit for the Graziani massacre, and nothing came of it, which is too bad in its ancient history. I believe the museum has made a tragic mistake in getting fooled by a terrorist group. And it should be clear enough why the TPLF did it. It is so disgustingly cynical in its purpose because they want to make their narrative for Tigray genocide unimpeachable. If you associate yourself with the Holocaust, well, then you can't be questioned, you can't be challenged. And when some of us complained, which is our democratic right to express our views, we got this, and this, and this. Look at this. Let me walk you through something. I've gone through the posts and I haven't seen any denial of the Holocaust itself, but it's pretty disingenuous to measure the outcry over an institution's policy by its stupidest participant. That's cheap and it's low. Let me show you some of the personal items in my book collection. Here's Nuremberg history in terms of the Nuremberg war trials. Here is the Buchenwald report. Here is a history of what the Nazis did to homosexuals. Here are volumes, which I'm very glad I have. These were all published in the 1930s. So the trail, all the warning signs can be traced right back. We have proof of where events were going from the Holocaust. This, Nazism, an assault on civilization, copyright 1934. But you know what the Jews didn't have during their 1930s and 40s persecution? They didn't have a terrorist group. They didn't have a lobby group. And you guys have both. The Toronto Star was a newspaper where a brave correspondent named Matthew Holton was reporting on how bad it was getting in Nazi Germany. And if you read Deborah Lipstadt's Beyond Belief, you know that nobody was really doing the story in the New York Times or in other American newspapers. They didn't have a CNN to raise the flag. They had newsreels, but nobody was really going after what was happening. The situation was dire and virtually no one was helping them. And it's a tragedy they didn't. But even if they had, we would be able to check their accounts. Let me tell you a story about a guy you may not have heard of. His name was Pierre Van Passen, and he used to be a hugely successful journalist, was on the front page of the Toronto Star all the time. I can't show you the Star pages because that's copyright infringement, but trust me, he was big. And he was a crusading journalist over what was happening against the Jews, just like Halton. Where am I going with this? To make a very long story short, then he wrote an article about how he got taken to the Nazi headquarters in Munich and they beat the shit out of him. And then how he got taken to a concentration camp. Only the details of his story kept changing, and by the time he put in a memoir, he claims he spent time in Dachau. It's in this book. This is his memoir. Big problem. Dachau didn't exist at the time he said he was there. But you know who else thought his story smelled? The Jewish Daily Bulletin, and here is their coverage of it. Note the date, February 12th, 1934. Millions of Jews were murdered. So were socialists. So were homosexuals. So were Jehovah's Witnesses. And the list goes on. But this creep soiled the memory of every article he wrote, and he's an insult to every genuine victim who went through Dachau. Somewhere in my shelves around here is a copy of the films of the Nuremberg trials. They oriented the courtroom back then to a big projection screen to show actual footage of the camps. They put signed affidavits at the front of the films because they knew this stuff was almost beyond belief. And they knew they had to prove their case. So, what's my point? That nothing is so sacred that we shouldn't be allowed to ask questions and to challenge the prevailing view. When the New York Times was putting out its biased coverage in 2021, the ambassador from Ethiopia to the US could not get a letter to the editor published in the newspaper. We can't get op-eds with Ethiopian point of view published in the Globe and Mail. We point out how the BBC is manipulating images and relying on a guy who is a known liar and friend of the TPLF, Alex DeWall, but do they change their ways? No. We bring proof, and you do your best to block every avenue in the West to let our side be heard. If your case is so obvious, if your evidence is so solid, what are you afraid of? Why can't it bear scrutiny? Why is it that not one Western media operation has addressed my questions about Axum? And how are you going to explain this video that shows you're lying? Especially when it was uploaded to YouTube weeks before there were any accusations of a massacre. You guys claim we're genocide deniers, that we're government partisans and trolls and bots, and then you make this pathetic implication that we're all far right-wing. Well, I ain't. I've written queer erotica and I support LGBTQ rights. I'm a capitalist when I get book royalties and I'm a socialist when I go to the doctor. I live in Canada. I fucking hate Donald Trump. I believe in climate change. I support a women's rights to choose. So don't park that shit at my door. We are going to have this discussion, whether you like it or not, because your narrative is not sacred. We will keep talking about how your hashtag Tigray genocide spontaneously appears on November 4th, 2020. And how is it possible that a genocide suddenly happens from that day? We are going to talk about Mike Khadra and how you tried to flip the narrative. But too damn bad, because I went there and others went there and we spoke to the real victims and we saw the mass graves. We are going to keep mentioning how the joint UN Ethiopian Human Rights Commission report didn't give you the free pass of genocide that you wanted. We are going to talk about all this because Canada and the United States are democracies, and so is Ethiopia now, and we will have our say. And I think your position is contemptible and repulsive. Is an insult to every real massacre and pogrom and genocide victim that is out there, whether it's a victim from the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide or the Graziani massacre. Not because we deny that atrocities may have happened in the war, which, by the way, the Ethiopian state arrested, tried, and sent to prison a group of soldiers for atrocities. Just when will the TPLF be holding their trials over what was done in Amhara and Afar? No, it's an insult because you have the gall to claim that no one else gets the right to speak but you, that there is somehow a pecking order to the barbarisms of the world, and you just happen to have won the victim sweepstakes. What you call whataboutism is us setting the record straight on what the TPLF did to Amhara people for close to 30 years and what the TPLF has been doing to Amhara people now, what the TPLF is doing to Afar people now, what the OLF is doing to Amhara people now. Your TPLF lobby disgusts me beyond belief because you seek to intimidate the world by painting critics as deniers, as criminals for not bowing down and letting you have your little festival of virtue signaling. You work on the basest of impulses and want to intimidate through fear and social coercion. I'm not having it, and others won't have it either. As I wrote earlier today, great for you. You convinced the Guardian, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, the BBC, all of them, even the Holocaust Memorial Museum, that the sun revolves around the earth. But you forgot one thing. Sooner or later, there's a Galileo.